Pact of Friendship by Hans Christian Andersen, published in 1842. Let us leave the familiar Danish coast and visit the strange shores of Greece, where the sea is as blue as a cornflower in our northern fields. See the lemon trees, how their branches heavy with yellow fruit bend toward the earth. Around the marble pillars, thistles are growing and hide the pictures cut in the white stone. Here is a shepherd. Beside him is his dog. We sit down nearby, and he begins to tell us about an ancient custom, the Friendship Pact, in which he himself has taken part. The walls of our house were made of mud, yet our entrance was framed by 2 marble pillars. They had been found near where our house was built. The roof almost touched the ground. It was black and ugly, although it had been made from flowering oleander and fresh laurel branches, brought from the other side of the mountains. The plot of land around our house was narrow. Behind it rose the black, bare stone sides of the mountains. Their tops were often covered by clouds that looked like living white figures. Never have I heard a bird sing there, nor did the men of my district ever dance to the tune of the bagpipes. From ancient times it has been considered a holy place. The name itself is sacred, Delphi. The dark, somber mountains are covered with snow until late spring. The highest on whose pinnacle the evening sun shines longest is called Parnassus. The waters of the brook that flows past our house comes up from there. It was once holy, but now mules muddy it with their feet, yet it flows so swiftly that soon it is clear again. Oh, I recall it all, the holy, lonely stillness. In the middle of our hut was the fire. Here, when the glowing ashes were piled high, bread was baked. In winter, when there was so much snow that our house was almost hidden, my mother seemed happiest. Then she would take my head into both her hands, kiss my forehead, and sing the songs that she dared not sing in summer, for the Turks were our masters, and they did not allow us to sing such songs. On the mountain of Olympus, among the low fir trees, stood an old stag. His eyes were heavy with tears, red, green, and pale blue were their colors. A young deer came by and asked, "Why are you shedding red, green, and pale blue tears?" "The Turks have come to our village, they have, brought wild dogs for the hunt. I will chase them out upon the islands," said the young deer. But before night had come, the deer was slain, and before night was over, the old stag had been hunted down and killed. As my mother finished her sad song, her eyes grew moist, and she had to turn away in order to hide the tears that clung to her long eyelashes. I clenched my fist and said, "We will kill the Turks." My mother turned our black bread in the ashes and sang again the last line of the song. But before night had come, the deer was slain, and before night was over, the stag had been hunted down and killed. My father had been away for many days. When I saw him coming, I ran to meet him. I hoped that he would bring me some shiny shells from the Bay of Lampanto, or maybe even a sharp knife. But he brought us a little naked girl. He had carried her inside his sheepskin coat. She lay in a bag of lambskin, and when she was taken out of it and put into my mother's lap, all she was wearing were the 3 silver coins that were braided in her hair. My father told us that the Turks had killed her parents. He himself had been wounded, and his coat was stiff from his own blood that had frozen to ice. My mother bandaged the wound. It was deep and ugly. That night I had strange dreams. The little girl was to be brought up as my sister. She was beautiful. Her eyes were as kind and as beautiful as my mother's. Anastasia was my little sister's name. Her father had taken a vow of friendship with mine. It was an ancient custom to which we still adhere. Those youths who decided to take an oath of brotherhood chose among the girls of the village the one whom they considered the most virtuous and the most beautiful, and she is the witness, the priestess who confirms their pact of friendship. Now the little girl had become my sister. She sat on my lap, and I picked flowers for her and brought her feathers that I had found on the mountainside. Together we drank of the waters from Parnassus, and we slept next to each other under the laurel leaf roof of our hut. Many long winters we listened to my mother's song about the red, green, and pale blue tears, without understanding that it was the sorrow of our people that was mirrored in these tears. One day 3 Frenchmen came. They were dressed so differently from us. They had beds and tents on their pack horses. 20 Turkish soldiers, all armed with swords and guns, escorted them, for they were friends of the Pasha, and had a letter from him to tell us who they were, and that we were to be hospitable to them. They had only come to look at our barren, black mountains, to climb to the top of Parnassus, up among the clouds and snow. Our little hut was too small for them all. Besides, the smoke from our fire made their eyes smart as it drifted toward the door. They set up camp on the narrow patch of ground around our house and built their fires, over which they roasted lambs and birds. They drank sweet wine, which they offered to the Turkish soldiers, but they didn't dare touch it. When they left, I followed them part of the way. I carried Anastasia on my back in a bag made from goatskin. One of the Frenchmen asked me to stand, leaning against a cliff, and he would make a sketch of us. In the drawing, we looked almost alive, and as though we were only one person. When I saw it, I could not help thinking that it was true. We were one, for Anastasia was never out of my sight or out of my mind, even at night. If I dreamed, she was in my dreams. 2 nights later, there were other people in our hut. They were armed with guns and knives. They were Albanians, brave people, my mother said. They did not stay long. One of them took my sister Anastasia on his knee. When they were gone, she had only 2, not 3 silver coins in her braids. They put tobacco in strips of paper and smoked it. They discussed in which direction they should go, and the oldest of them said, "If I spit up in the air, the spit will fall in my face, and if I spit downward, it will fall in my beard." But finally they had to make up their minds. They left, and my father went with them to show them the way. A little while later, we heard shots. Soldiers came into our hut. They said that we had hidden robbers, and that my father had joined their band. So now we would have to leave our homes and follow the soldiers. We passed the place where the battle had been. I saw the corpses of the robbers and the dead body of my father. All I can remember is crying, and then waking up in prison. The cell was neither small nor more barren than the room in our hut. We were given onions and resin wine, and that, too, was not much different from the fare we were used to. I do not remember how long we were imprisoned, but many days and weeks must have passed. We were set free on Easter Day. My mother was sick. For her sake, we had to walk very slowly. It took us a long time to walk to the coast. When we arrived at the Bay of Lepanto, we entered a church. The holy pictures glistened, for they were on a background of gold. They were pictures of angels, though none of them seemed to me more beautiful than our Anastasia. In the middle of the church stood a coffin filled with roses. The roses were the symbol of our Lord Jesus, my mother said. The priest declared, "Christ has arisen," and everybody kissed one another. We were all given a lighted candle. Even little Anastasia had one. Someone played the bagpipes, and the men made their way from the church dancing, hand in hand, while the women of the village roasted the Easter lambs over great fires. We were invited to eat and sat down by the fire. A boy a few years older than myself kissed me and said, "Christ has arisen." And that was how we 2 met, Aftanides and I. My mother was clever at weaving fishnets, and we stayed several months near the sea. I learned to love the water that tasted of salt and reminded me of the stag's tears, for the beautiful sea is sometimes red, other times green, only to turn pale blue at midday. Aftanides was a good sailor. He knew how to steer a boat. As silently as the clouds sail in the sky, we would glide through the waters. Anastasia and I would sit in the bottom of the boat. At sunset, the mountains were dark blue. Our chain seemed to look over the shoulder of another. Farthest away stood Mount Parnassus, with its snow-covered peaks. Blood red in the evening sun, it towered over all the others. Its peak looked as if it was made of melting iron. The luminous red glow seemed to come from inside the mountain, for it shone long after the sun had set. Only the wings of the seagulls disturbed the mirror of the sea. Anastasia was sitting next to me. I leaned back. The first stars of evening had come, shining like the candles under the holy pictures in the church. They were the same stars that had looked down on me when I sat outside our hut in Delphi. I closed my eyes. Everything was as peaceful, and I dreamed myself back there. There was a splash. The boat rocked. I screamed. Anastasia had fallen into the sea. Aftanides was already in the water. He handed my little sister up to me before she had even swallowed a mouthful of water. We took off her clothes and wrung them out. Aftanides did the same with his. We stayed out until their clothes were dry, so that no one else ever knew how close to death my little sister had come, and what a part Aftanides had played in saving her life. Summer came. The sun baked down upon the earth, scorching it. I thought of the cool mountains and the brook near our house. My mother, too, longed for home. One evening, we started the long walk back. How silent and still it was. The thyme grew tall, and though the sun had dried its leaves, it still had a sweet smell. We did not pass a hut or see a shepherd. Everything was so motionless, so quiet, that the faraway heavens seemed more alive than the earth. I counted the shooting stars. I don't know whether the blue air lighted itself or was lit by starlight, but we could plainly see the outlines of the mountains. My mother made a fire and roasted onions for us to eat. Anastasia and I lay down to sleep without fear of the monstrous smirdraki, from whose mouths, it is said, come burning fire, or the wolves who live in the mountains. For my mother sat close to us, and my little sister and I were still young enough not to be afraid of the world when she was near. Finally, we reached our old home. It was a ruin. It would have to be rebuilt. A couple of women helped my mother, and within a few days the walls stood again, and a new roof of oleander covered them. Out of skin and bark, my mother wove nets for covering wine bottles. I tended the priest's little herd of goats. Anastasia and the little turtles were my playmates. One day Afterneeds came to visit us. He said that he had missed us very much, and he stayed 2 whole days. A month later he returned, this time to say goodbye. He was to become a sailor, and was leaving on a ship bound for Pastris and Corfu. He had brought a big fish, which he gave to my mother. He could tell so many stories, not only about the fishermen who lived in the Bay of Lepanto, but also about the heroes and kings who once ruled Greece as the Turks do now. When does the bud on the rosebush open itself? What day, what week, what hour? One does not notice, but suddenly it is there, and one realizes how beautiful the flower is. Thus it was with Anastasia. One day I noticed that she was a lovely, full-grown girl. Years had gone by. The wolfskins that covered my mother's and Anastasia's bed had come from the animals that I had shot. One evening toward sunset, Afterneeds came. He was thin as a reed, strong and brown by the sun. He kissed us all and told us about his life as a seaman and the places he had seen, the fortress of Malta and the pyramids of Egypt. He spoke well, and his stories were like the legends the priest could tell. I felt a great respect and admiration for him. "How much you have seen and experienced," I said, "and how well you tell about it." "But you have told me about something that I think is the most beautiful of all," replied Afterneeds. "I can't forget it. I mean the old custom of having a pact of friendship. Let us be brothers, as your father and Anastasia's were. Anastasia, our sister, shall be witness, for a more beautiful or virtuous girl there is not in all of Greece." Anastasia blushed, and her cheeks turned the color of a rose petal. My mother kissed Afterneeds. "It is an hour walk from our hut to the church. There the soil is richer, and tall trees cast their shade. In front of the altar a little lamp is always burning." I wore my best clothes. My red blouse fitted me tightly around my waist. Silver was woven into the tassel of my fez. In my belt were stuck not only a knife but a pistol as well. Afterneeds wore the blue uniform of a Greek sailor. On a silver chain around his neck he wore a medallion of the Holy Virgin. His scarf was as costly as only the richest men wear. Everyone could see that we were dressed for no ordinary occasion. We walked into the little church. The evening sun shone through the door, and the many-colored pictures and the silver lamp reflected its light. We kneeled down on the step in front of the altar. Anastasia stood before us. She was wearing a long white dress that hung loosely over her beautiful young body. A collar made of coins, both ancient and new ones, covered her neck and breast. Her black hair had been set up in a single coil and was held in place by a little cap of gold coins, found in the ancient temples. More beautiful jewels than these no Greek girl can wear. Her face was radiant. Her eyes were like 2 stars. Silently all 3 of us prayed. When we were finished, she asked, "Will you be friends in life and death?" "Yes," we answered. "Will you remember that, whatever happens, your brother is part of you? That your secret is his and his happiness yours? Devotion, sacrifice, perseverance must your soul bear for his sake, and his for yours." "Yes," we said again, and Anastasia took our hands and joined them together. Then she kissed each of us on the forehead, and together we said our prayers once more. The priest, who had been standing behind the altar, now came forward and blessed all 3 of us. As we stood up, I saw my mother at the door of the church. She was crying. How happy were the days that followed! In our little hut near the waters of Delphi, the evening before Afterneeds was to depart, we were sitting outside on the edge of the cliff, deep in thought. His arm was around my shoulders, and mine around his. We talked about Greece, the plight of our poor country, and discussed whom we could trust. No thought did we hide from each other, and therefore I grabbed his hand and said, "One thing you must know. Until now I have told no one but God, that in my soul is a love greater than even my love for my mother and for you." Afterneeds' face and neck turned red, and he asked, "Whom do you love?" "I love Anastasia," I whispered. His hand trembled in mine. His face turned as pale as a corpse. I understood how clear it all was. I bent down and kissed his forehead. "I have never told her," I said. "Maybe she does not love me, but, brother mine, remember that I have been with her every day. She has grown up not only in our house, but in my soul as well." "She shall be yours," he said. "I cannot lie to you, and I won't. I admit that I love her too. Tomorrow I am leaving for more than 2 years. Before I return you will be married. I have some money. It is yours. No, you shall have it. You must." Slowly we walked back toward the hut. Night had come, and Anastasia met us at the doorstep. She was holding a lamp in her hand. My mother was not at home. Anastasia looked strangely sad as she spoke to Aftanides. "Tomorrow you leave us," she said. "How unhappy I shall be." "You'll miss me?" In Aftanides' words lay a sadness beyond sorrow, a pain as great as my own. I said nothing, but he took her hand in his and said, "My brother here loves you. Do you love him?" His silence speaks loudly of his love. Anastasia shivered and burst into tears. I saw only her and thought only of her. I threw my arms around her and said again and again, "I love you." She kissed me and her arms embraced my neck. The lamp fell from her hand and the room was as dark as the heart of my poor brother Aftanides. At sunrise he rose, kissed us all good-bye and left. His money he had given to my mother to keep for us. A few days later, Anastasia became my wife.